Eyes open, and the world searches again for itself. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode. A title arose to me, a title both playful and profound. I was thinking about the concept of self-reflection, and I was thinking about its meaning, and then I was thinking about how when a human being, let's say, self-reflects and wonders about who they are, they inevitably come to this existential and experiential point of observation where let's say there's a person self-reflecting and thinking that, life is good, life is bad, life should be like that, life should be like this. And at some point, this person who is, let's say, this sense of self that is animate through the construct or the context of a story, it's as if a subjective self is reflecting on its objective existence, on the objective world, and at some point everybody on this planet will realize that what we are suffering from is a permission to see the world. That means technically when a person suffers from the world, right, how would I say it? It's like when an individual is suffering, they are seeing something, and there's some part of their intelligence that is like another level of opinion, is like another opinionized level over it. What I'm trying to say is that the human position, okay, and when we think about consciousness, I mean, there are theories on consciousness, and these theories kind of fragment the mystery of consciousness in the eyes of the human being. But I would say that pretty much every human being on this earth that can pretty much, communicate and move, pretty much there's a subjective movement and there's an objective movement, and the mystery of consciousness is pretty much the species or the human being or the individual excuse me. The mystery of consciousness is a human being asking what is moving, and in some sense, what is moving the subject and what is moving the object. Now, what's very fascinating is that we think that the understanding of human consciousness should be in a singular fashion, right? So when you look at the theories of consciousness, and pretty much they diverge into for now, as a matter of explanation, monoism and dualism. So let me start off this episode by actually, I keep saying starting off, but it's like already started. Pretty much I'm this human being wondering about the nature of consciousness, wondering how human beings are becoming conscious of reality, and wondering about the role of an existential sun in our solar system and the role of the mysterious experiential subjective position of consciousness. Okay, so when, let's say in a manner of speech, consciousness can be divided into monoism and dualism. So think of consciousness, whoever you are listening to me right now, think of consciousness as an unknown event. And people are like, what do we do with this unknown event? It's like, what is this? And so those, I would say, scholars of the realm have in some sense concluded that in mono, it pretty much the number 1 and 2. Like if a person realizes this, the number 1 and 2, they'll understand pretty much the nature of this reality. So monoism, you can think of it as the number 1, which means a sort of singularity of truth. Okay, so in regards to monoism, there are people who believe in an objective, purely objective truth, singular objective truth, and there are those who believe in a singular subjective truth. Religious people believe in a singular subjective truth. Secular people believe in a singular objective truth. The causal position of the mystery of consciousness is either being a subject by some, is being held as a subject by some, or is being held or considered as an object. So that's in some sense monoism. Now, when it comes to Monism, instead of me saying objective truth, subjective truth, there's names for it. Those that follow the subjective truth, this is called idealism. And very playfully, an easy way to remember it is that an idea is in some sense that an idea is in the driver's seat. And when you look at materialism, so pretty much subjective truth, idealism, objective truth, materialism. And of course, there's different types of materialism here. But just for now, I'll keep it at this. You know, there's idealism and there's materialism. So pretty much think of consciousness as the trunk of a tree turns into two branches, monoism and dualism. And then one branch, which is monoism, turns into two other branches, which is objective truth, subjective truth. Objective truth is materialism, subjective truth is idealism. Right? So monoism became materialism and idealism. Now dualism, I would say, through the eyes of the scholar, is in some sense the consideration, or I would say it maybe this way, that there is substance dualism and there is property dualism. And pretty much dualism means that there are two dimensions simultaneously being reality. You know, for example, the religious person is like, the world is just God's mind happening, right? And in some sense, the secular person is saying the world is pretty much like mindless matter happening, right? That means technically, from a pure materialistic perspective, the idea of knowledge, everything is a meaning is a hallucination of the meaningless. From a purely materialistic perspective. That means if a person wants to worship objects, you end up becoming a materialist. If you want to worship subjects, you end up becoming an immaterialist in the sense of for example, a religious devotee or something. You know, for me, I was very fascinated the moment I realized that every person in a monotheistic religion in the Abrahamic traditions is worshiping an inconceivable God. You know? This is another way of saying that people are worshipping an inconceivable causal source to the universe, to universal intelligence, right? And believe it or not, this world is so incredible that there is beauty in everywhere, you know. A person can speak to a religious person and get fascinated. A person can speak to a secular person and get fascinated. And a person can, in some sense, speak to, I would say, the nature of your world. You know, it's as if mystics, people don't realize, they thought it was just like these strange people going into caves and meditating for years. Mystics, in some sense, were human beings that had noticed that this whole time there has been an unknown dimension, an unknown presence to the activity of the world. And so the mystic has to, I would say, I think I can say it well now, that mysticism is when the human being has learned from the known world and the known self, and now the teachings of the unknown self and the unknown world remain, and there is an authority here, guys, that I would not let an idea grab it. You know, it's as if imagine there's this state of freedom, right? And it's like everything is trying to enslave this freedom. Objects are trying to define that freedom, subjects are trying to define that freedom, combinations of objects and subjects are trying to define that freedom. But it's like the freedom of a king that has sat on its throne. That's the nature of truth. It is like this brilliant position where the unknown knows it's unknown, but man doesn't know. So the theories of consciousness, there's dualism, substance dualism, property dualism. Pretty much simple way of remembering it is that substance dualism is pretty much, dualism is the consideration. It's an idea brought forth by René Descartes, if you're someone new listening to this. Rene Descartes was pretty much this dude who looked at the world and he's like, I want to understand truth, right? He was like a next level mathematician and philosophically wondrous person. And so Rene Descartes does something in history which is, I would say, one of the most badass things a human mind has ever done on this planet, right? Rene Descartes fearlessly takes this approach known as a sort of methodical doubt. And what he's doing is pretty much he's saying, I'm going to use doubt as a filter to see what can I not doubt. And when I find something in this world that I cannot doubt, that is my truth. Right? And so Rene Descartes realizes he can doubt everything except the one who is doubting. He cannot doubt the doubter. And he comes to this conclusion that there is an isolated thinking subject that is independent of all that is seeing. It's as if the question of who is living a life and the awareness of all your memories is like not your memories. You know, this notion that we as human beings have so simply accepted the idea of the mind without knowing what it is. You know, so simply have accepted the idea like, yeah, memory is a file cabinet. No. It is activation oriented. We are in, I would say, an evocational universe, spelled E-V-O-C-A-T-I-O-N-A-L. Evocational. That means it must be evoked, right? That means we think that souls come and go. You know, it's like, oh, look at, like the Buddhist is like, oh, look at my soul reincarnating as a baby, you know, in this lifetime, you know. But in reality, the mystery of what is moving the world seems to surpass how human beings interpret the world. And this is the coolest moment in history. And if you are someone who is, I would say, past oriented, you will fear the future. That's what the past exists for, right? The past exists to, in some sense, see if the future is worthy. As if, imagine in history, past systems, just systems, things that our ancestors did. It's like people in modern times are repeating it. And when somebody comes and says, hey, maybe we look at it from a different angle, do you know, then there's a war between the past for the future. I would say, like on some level, when I look at myself right now in this lifetime, 2022 right now, I see myself as if I am, sure, in the outer realms on some level, just some dude on his balcony, like recording a podcast on YouTube, but on a non-objective level, right? I don't know how to tell you this, but on some level, I feel that this moment in history, when I'm giving these talks, there is a great language world, and there is a great subjective and objective possession game that is happening. That means, imagine, you know, a species went to another planet, and then some force on that planet was like, imagine you're a captain of a team, right? And you see that your team members are being defeated. Or imagine you're a general on a battlefield, right? Like, imagine you're a general on the battlefield and you see that, like, your soldiers and commanders are helpless, and then suddenly some might of authority roars from you. Do you know? And the general marches into the battlefield. You know, that means it's as if we are living in a time right now where I think that what is going on is that dimensions are being born through one another, right? This is a very bizarre idea, but let me share it. The dimensions are being born through one another in the sense that there was first an objective dimension, just objects, and somehow a subjective dimension was born. And now there's a subjective dimension, and now a post-subjective dimension is being born. Right? We are living at that time when a species is realizing that the language of the past doesn't have to define its actions of the future, but at the same time, what is the proper action for the future? there's moments where in this lifetime I have felt I am free. For example, there is like the concept of enlightenment as a sort of ultimate freedom. There has been also moments, especially when I was younger, where I felt the opposite of enlightenment. If enlightenment is like a door opening, I felt like there were doors closing when I was younger. And for the longest time, it was as if the story, like my name and personality, and the story I was telling myself about myself was in some sense blindfolding me from what is actually going on beyond the dimensions of myself. When I'm telling you consciousness is self-reflecting off of the sun, I am saying that at some point in the understanding of how humanized behavior occurs, there is a dehumanized state of observance. You know what it is? It's like in front of our eyes, we're human. Behind our eyes, we are the space where intelligence is happening. It's as if like this whole time we haven't just been a physical being, we have also been, we haven't just been a material being, we have been a space being. We are being space as much as we are being matter, and because we don't realize it, the mystery of consciousness is just limited to one side of a coin, when I think about myself, sometimes I would say I'm playful in my inner realms and thoughts. The levels to certain thoughts open up. And there's moments where I look at, for example, something good, like a good scenario, and my mind just sees like variations of it, like updating. And then there's times where I see like, I don't know how to tell you. This might be bizarre, but I guess I'll share the idea. Imagine an atheist says, I don't believe in God, I believe in anti-God. Okay, just like we have antimatter, we have matter and antimatter. Imagine there was this, scientist saying, I believe in anti-God, right? And imagine this in this hypothetical setting, this person was asked, okay, why do you believe in the anti-God? And the person would say, because God is not a creation of itself. You see, from the theological lens, the concept of God has fascinated people throughout history. Why? Because it is the creator that wasn't created. The concept of the inconceivable, the concept of God, the concept of the soul, the concept of the unknown, the concept of the beyond, the concept of the transcendental, the concept of the heavenly, the concept of the advanced. You see, what's fascinating is that the mind can be defined as the potential of the body. So the mind is the potential of the body, and the soul poetically is the potential of the mind. I think that's one of the greatest definitions a human being can come up with for the soul. It's the potential of mind. Now, if mind constitutes objects being interpreted as subjects, it's as if, dear listeners, all of us are in 3 dimensions actually, but for the body and mind it's 2. When it comes to the soul, the 3rd dimension is like how one point of a triangle extended the other 2 points. It's as if there was a mystery to the world, then there was a mystery to the self, and then there was mystery to others. When I ask myself, what kind of greatness is achievable by just in this world, not a greatness of a human being, but what is the greatness of just a conscious awareness being the moment? Like, what sort of greatness can it achieve, right? And I've realized, just like light going through a lens, the body is a lens for intelligence. It's something intelligence is not, but is moving through. Like when a person moves through a tunnel, right? Or when a person gets on a bus or a subway, are they being the bus? Are they being the subway? You know, technically from one point, they're moving like as the subway, right? As the metro, you know, as the train. But on another level, they are not the train, right? So we are inside the movement of something that we're associating, but what is inside it is not the association. We are on a mysterious transport circumstance. You know, I don't know how many people have thought about this life like this, but in some, I mean, of course, Buckminster Fuller, Marshall McLuhan, you know, to me, these geniuses spoke about spaceship Earth. They were so ahead of their time. Buckminster Fuller, guys, I was seeing his videos and I was getting goosebumps. I was watching also, the Buckminster Fuller has a video with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. It's like one of the most epic things to watch. I would say it's one of the most rarest videos to actually find. Not find, but like to see. To get to see. Who knew the world is a vehicle for an unchangeable witnessing mystery? And as objects realize they are subjects, and as subjects realize the unknown, there is freedom, dear listeners. That's it. Sometimes I wonder, why is the world happening? And it's like the freedom is an answer. The world is trying to free itself from itself because it is everything. That's the task of a universal being. All that a universal being can do is in some sense create itself into fragments and then in some sense return the fragments. So in other words, this game of gods and men, this game of non-existence and existence, this game of the inconceivable and conceivable, as the poet Rumi says, I don't remember the exact quote, but Rumi talks about it as if like truth is a mirror that has shattered into tiny pieces, and every piece is in some sense reflecting the truth of it, right? That means if there was a tiny mirror and there was a big mirror, they're both reflecting the same truth. But their capacity is also equal, but their size is different. That means there could be, let's say, a lesser dimensional being like a squirrel, then there could be, let's say, a higher dimensional being than that, like a human being, and then let's say there's a higher dimensional being than human beings. Let's call them deities. Secular society would call them probably aliens, you know. All dimensions of the world in which there is some sort of function of dualism have no choice but to reflect either a singular void truth or an infinite void truth. If somebody was like Mr.Within, on Earth, do human beings need to learn about emptiness? I would say, like, because Buddha said it, sure. Like, human beings have to pay attention to emptiness, but really Earth, this workstation, this room we're in, and there's multiple rooms here, guys, you know, it's as if like what we think is a planet on a rock in the middle of nowhere is like it's like being in one room of a cosmic house and thinking that room is the cosmos. Technically you're right, but technically you're also wrong. The microcosm is not the macrocosm, yet all the microcosmic elements are being the microcosm. It's as if together the species becomes greatness, but when we are fragmented, you know, people have to deal with the flames of their inner truth. Everybody is like, again, a piece of the mirror. You know, pretty much before this episode, this thought occurred to me. I just remembered. This thought occurred to me that everything I'm suffering from is technically light's translation. You know, when I say self-reflecting off of the sun, It's another way of saying, like, what is happening with the human experience. Light from like a celestial object that in some sense is at a very high temperature. It's like consciousness is the result of the universe becoming warmer, not colder. So you know what I mean? That means, like, sure, the background radiation of the whole cosmos, Hubble telescope noticed it, and it's like, all right, the planet's cooling off, the planet's chilling out, But on some level, I feel consciousness is the opposite. I feel this is something probably nobody has theorized it like this, or maybe they have, I don't know, but I will attempt to maybe be the first, that consciousness is temperature. It's like when the temperatures are low, it's like there's nothing moving, god damn it, and then when the temperature increases, oh my god, look at this beautiful evolution of a species. It's like right now, if I was indoors, I'd be experiencing room temperature consciousness, Oh man, human beings are hilarious creatures because their existential position is hilarious. The human beings, like, man, I had hopes, dreams, and ambitions, but like, where am I? It is sometimes beautiful to know what one doesn't know. I think a lot of liberation comes from that. After listening to Terence McKenna, I was wondering, why is this guy ordering so much mushrooms on his pizza? And then I realized, because the human mind is moving faster than the outer realms. And so if we identify with the outer realms, the mind's gonna be like, man, I'm right here, there's another dimension of movement, right? So it's as if we're in this situation where, hilariously, as creatures that communicate as an object and as a subject, and using objective means such as our voice and mouth, and then subjective means in regards to the language we communicate, it's as if a species has built a system it's functioning in, is trying to use this system to understand the functions of the greater systems, the cosmic system, but is realizing that its system is limited, right? Like, sure, somebody could be like, our ancestors couldn't, fly to the moon, fly to Mars and all this, right? But how would I say it? Light enters our eyes and transforms nowhere into a visual now here. Light is technically being the world for human beings. Light is translating the unknown world, to an unknown self who has forgotten its unknown nature and thinks it's a subject. And it's a bit strange, right? Because I think all philosophers in history had to wonder, as if, are we moving the species towards identification with matter or identification with consciousness? Consciousness is like an invisible hand holding everything that is being made aware of in the moment. It's not just in the, economics, we have an invisible hand. There's an invisible hand to, I would say, how ideology administers. It's as if, in traditional spirituality or new age ideology, the person's like, my guardian angels are defending me, from, the messed up stuff in this world, right? And now imagine the notion of like there being that invisible hand being a sort of, for example, the person's let's say it's as if the guardian angels of your the guardian angels of not your body, but the guardian angels of your mind. There's been moments where I have had thoughts and I've literally felt like something in my moment pulled that thought away from me. As if like something is watching over how an object moves, and something is watching over how a subject becomes or awakens. It's just remarkable. It's as if the human intelligence is so integrative and interconnected in nature. It's as if like we're seeing so many dimensions to nature, but all these dimensions are connected and they have interactions with one another, similar to how the organs of the body behave, the dimensions of human perception. They have an interconnected relationship with one another. I think if a human being says, I am made, like if they imagine an extraterrestrial in the future, hypothetically, like, we're like, similar to us aliens, but, a bit more wiser and benevolent. And these aliens ask us, friends from another galaxy, and they ask us in some sense, what are you guys? What are you, like, you human beings, what are you? How do you guys define yourselves? And so imagine a human being is like, okay, technically we are the periodic table. Technically we are the movement of neurons. Technically we are just geometry and shape of just a changing world. Technically we are just light. And also technically we're just our memory. That means I think one of the most fascinating things, right, is that we are limited ideologically and maybe to some degree one can say visually to our memory. You know what it is? It's like a person thinks they have free will and everything they're seeing, like it's as if, it's as if the assumption of free will has to come from an assumption. True free will is when you are, how would I tell you? It's as if, how can you have free will if the world is not free? It's as if somebody says, I have space to dance, but there's no space to dance. Imagine they're in a, room filled with like furniture, packed furniture. So one can say technically we are like unknown free will. Like that would be an answer we could give. Or just consciousness. And then it's like pretty much a fractal, as above, so below idea comes into this. You see, guys, when I speak, maybe this is something interesting I can share. When I speak, it's as if I'm drawing a point and I'm drawing lines through it. I'm drawing different axes, like I'm drawing one axis which is known, unknown. So it's like, imagine somebody's trying to understand something, right? And you're like, your mind's asking, okay, is it known or is it unknown? Is it simple or is it complex? Is it individual or is it collective? Is it visible or is it invisible? Is it real or is it unreal? You see, these are it's as if attention and energy is just existing as a moment, and every act of the mind, every performance, every brainwave is in some sense like another line in this point, another line in the point of the present, right? And people have to realize consciousness is conditional to something. The word consciousness exists because we have bodies. But if there was an intelligence beyond the body, we could not call that consciousness, because we wouldn't know what it's conditional to. I like this, people think philosophy is like, man, what do I do with philosophy? I'll tell you, philosophy is kind of like trying to get out of a simulation, then do whatever you want. Philosophy is another way of saying those who were alive before us asked questions that were so mighty that we cannot ignore them today. Philosophy is like one of the best ways to honor your ancestors. Honor all our ancestors, the whole human effort. So anyways, imagine we told that extraterrestrial were all these options, and the extraterrestrial was like, are you also like all of them or none of them? And we'd be like, those are possibilities too, I'll tell the listeners something interesting that I've noticed recently. Recently I noticed that in my inner realms, I'm this person who's in Vision 2.0, and pretty much I would consider myself, at least, just from a realist perspective, that I'm one of the early birds talking about building an advanced civilization. There's something in the talks I call songs of the advanced civilization. What that means is when a species begins accelerating towards its greatness, it begins to become like beautiful music. So imagine, like, in the future, imagine you opened your front door, you went outside, and you heard the most beautiful music just coming from society, just coming from outside, as if like this great orchestra is playing and the music can be heard everywhere, right? An advanced civilization would be like that. The songs of an advanced civilization would be, in some sense, how human beings in their inner realms begin advancing. And as they begin advancing, their outer realms shift. People think that, oh man, there's one enlightenment. I sat in a cave for I think Tibetan Buddhist monks, they sit in a cave for 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days. Right? And the person's like, okay, I've been in, stillness for so long now. How have I understood the movement of the world? Some people spend their whole lives meditating, which is not, I wouldn't say it's wrong. Like, free will can do whatever it wants, but I'm saying, like, there's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right? But I would say when it comes to the human being, I feel it's more event participation. The psychology is bound. So how would I say it? It's like we are either so free that we can be unfree, or we are so unfree that the only thing left is to be free. And when human beings activate and their inner realms activate, right now, there's something that I think I'm gonna, like, hopefully people, the universe will send people who will help assist me in this, right? But I think that right now, pretty much a species has realized there's 2 modes of functioning on this earth. You can function as a mind first, then a body, or as a body that is howling a brain, or that's projecting a mind around, right? When you live as a mind, the presumptions on yourself are shapeless. When you live as a body, it's shape-bound, right? Imagine that beautiful music of the advanced civilization, the person being like, where's this music coming from? And finding this great orchestra of human effort towards the future. We have reached a point where there is no longer a need for physical rebellion, and it won't work anyways, right? It's like we have moved past the Che Guevara phase of the Guy Fawkes phase of, the civilization. Now we have reached a point where it's how the attention keeps itself. Right? There's pretty much two dimensions to every member of a civilization. One dimension is, in some sense, how's this advanced civilization treating you, and the other view is how are you treating the advanced civilization, right? And if these two are maxed out and the most win-win efficient strategy arises, then it's as if it's like, believe it or not, sometimes when you change the blueprint to perception, the value of what you see shifts and you begin to see new values, Man, I think if everybody had ultimate free will, if everybody was a god, there would be no, it would in some sense be a multiverse. So imagine a person believes in a multiverse and also believes in God. Like, we should name this something. Let's say the multiversal believer. I think this is going to be a thing, guys. Maybe from my talks, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like, sometimes I feel, how would I tell you? Sometimes I identify with the archetype of Rishi Vyasa. Rishi Vyasa was this man where he was known in Vedic history as the teacher of teachers. And the reason he was the teacher of teachers because people considered him the incarnation of God, an avatar of truth in language, right? And it was like, if I show you a picture of Rishi Vyasa, people are going to be like, no way, man. This guy's, if I show, okay, let me find the picture. Literally, there's this epic picture of Rishi Vyasa, guys, where, okay, perfect, I found it. So people are like, Mr. Within, it was Rishi Vyasa, it's this dude. Look at the video, guys. I'm gonna put the picture. This is Rishi Vyasa. Alright? This guy. You see? Not the guy sitting down. I don't know if that's his son or his disciple or something, right? But you see Rishi Vyasa sitting down and he has like a pen and notebook. This dude is ahead of his time. This dude, just like we have note application on our phone, this dude, like, people it's hilarious. The more you go back in history and you see writers, the more respect you have for them, because the world cared less about writing. The world cared more about the present experience of reality rather than the transition of knowledge, right? It's as if maybe one of the biggest issues to why the world is the way it is because people cannot see beyond the generations, beyond the generation their body's born in, and beyond the generations their mind is born in. So Rishi Vyasa, this dude was pretty much like, I would say, a very advanced antenna. And it was as if only when you're free of the mind, think of it this way, somebody who's like, they're free, like, okay, let's say we see an Olympian, okay, like a next level athlete, and we see this athlete, for example, like a hockey player, take the puck, do some next level, like, technique, and then score a goal, right? And so people look at that hockey player who's like, let's say, the greatest hockey player, or Wayne Gretzky, where there's a story where Wayne Gretzky has this quote, guys, where he says when he would play hockey, sometimes he would feel like he's watching the whole court from above his head, something like that. But pretty much what I'm trying to say is that when we look at somebody who has freedom in the physical dimension, we see like how incredibly they can move their body, right? And now when somebody is free in the dimensions of mind, you can actually incredibly move your mind, and you can even realize that just like how Like, we don't think about our breathing, it automatically happens. How intelligence or imagination, reality, how the inner realms happen, you can literally, it's like breathing. It can be automated, right? So I would say Rishi Vyasa was a being that outside of space and time was capable of moving all dimensions of it. That means dimensions of the body and the mind, right? But at the same time, his karma was also, manifestation usually has karma, and karma is another way of saying like what the world owes you, or what you owe the world, pretty much. Think of it this way. Think of it as if you're a Buddhist. You're thinking about reincarnation. You're thinking about, let's say, the reincarnation of a being in 1,000 lifetimes, right? Let's say we're doing a Buddhist analysis, a yogic analysis on, and so the person's like in let's say 1,000 lifetimes. Excuse me. Imagine in 1,000 lifetimes, the person imagine in like 1/3. Okay, so imagine in 334 lifetimes, right? Out of 1,000 lifetimes of a reincarnating entity, that entity was violent. Okay, let's say that entity destroyed more rather than created more. If we are reaching a point where society is being looped, and anything that is looped, it will feel like a sort of, it's like the idea of hell was like a sort of eternal looping damnation, right? If we were so let's say this back to the Buddhist analysis. So if a being in 1/3 of those 1,000 lifetimes was destroyed more than created, it's like that the nature of that being would be like a being that's starting to become good, for example. What I'm trying to say is that when you destroy, you're going to owe this world. So because you're going to owe this world, you're going to reincarnate. But when you create, it's like as if the world owes you and then the world releases you. It's as if one of the most hilarious things, people are like, how do I get out of karma and samsara? And then like one yogi was like, buddy, it's alive. Go ask directly the cosmos how to liberate yourself from it, rather than in some sense asking, the shadows of the greater dimensions, because really manifestation is a room. It's like somebody's gone to work and they're at the office and they're like, why don't I feel like I'm at home? That's pretty much human beings trying to reach divinity. Earth is a workstation, and they're like, man, why? It's like, why don't I feel like my soul's at home? Why don't I feel as if I'm in Brahma Loka already? What motivates behavior is the world moving the self, and then how much the self can move the world. It's as if like the World Health Organization saying people are being depressed, like depression statistics all over the globe, all over the planet are increasing, right? And it's as if it's like saying, it's like the more birds that were caged, the greater the percentage of, depression is, A quantum physicist was asked by someone, hey man, like what's actually happening in these quantum physics experiments, And the person's like, imagine you've gone into nature and you want to study a jaguar. You know, like the animal, you want to study a jaguar. And so imagine you take the jaguar out of its natural environment, you put it in a cage, and then you study it and say, you know, what is a jaguar? And so pretty much what's happening is that the brain is caging phenomena outside of it internally, and then wondering if what it has received is actual. On some level, that's what human beings are doing, right? Just like there's an urge of the, let's say, surviving in the fittest way, you know, to continue, get to the next, you know, checkpoint of manifestation. Freedom for an object is either non-existence or immortality. Freedom for a subject is either controlling or being controlled. And I would say the freedom of the soul is how it is independent of phenomena. That means it's like we are inside a phenomenology, wondering about like how are we being this phenomenology, but it's as if a dimension, a part of our essence, like the roots of the tree that are in the soil and are invisible to the eye. Do you know, when you look at a tree, like you don't see its roots, right? And it's as if when you look truly at what is looking through your eyes, you begin to see, it's as if you can't see its roots. It's rooted in the inconceivable. It's like another way of saying conception is rooted in the inconceivable. Or consciousness is the source of consciousness is rooted in the unconscious. That means something beyond the categorization ability of a brain is like happening here. Something else is happening here, right? It's as if the person's like, you know, the person looked at the concept of God and it's like, I don't believe that. That's man-made. The concept of God is man-made. Imagine like an, young bewildered atheist is saying this, right? And imagine somebody says, like a philosopher comes up to that atheist and says, buddy, if the concept of God was man-made, then what does that mean for the concept of man? The concept of man was also man-made. Do you see what I'm saying? That means who were we before we called ourselves man, like the human being? You see, it was as if we were a dehumanized movement of nature that was like, all right, I'm going to be a human being right now, and then, ran into the evolutionary field, What's happening here, guys? They had this idea of transmission, right? And the concept of initiation, even like right now, I think maybe modern esotericism has forgotten true esotericism, which was in some sense to be liberated beyond dualistic purpose. The yogis, it's hilarious. It's as if something has happened. I think they call it Kali Yuga, but pretty much it's as if some force is making human beings forget. It's as if people are like some spiritual people's, I've heard let's say spiritual talk in the lines of the person being like, before this life, it's like some I don't know, let's say transcendental agency makes you forget your memories, or even gives you false memories and sends you into the world or something, right? I've even heard like, how would I say? It's as if there's an amnesia towards one's origin, right? Divine origin. It's as if like certain spiritual people, it's like they are kind of like acting like a god that has forgotten itself, a forgotten god. That's the best definition of a spiritual person. Alright, I found the title for the next talk. A spiritual person is a forgotten god. Or a spiritual, how would I say it? Could spirituality be the forgetfulness of God? It's inner vision. So a mind can exist as a, so think of it this way. I'm going back to this, like the body notices it's being a body, let's say, and then notices that the body's being moved. It doesn't understand why it's moving, right? That means like the elements of the periodic table that are constituting me right now, right? It's as if atoms don't really care about personality, it seems. You know, it's like atoms don't engage human personality, right? So atoms don't know. It's as if like the soldiers of the, I use this metaphor where I say the soul is the general, the mind is the commander, and the body is the soldier. So the soldiers for the human experience are like the periodic table and all the elements that are constituting us, right? And all the classifications you conceive, you know. So it means in some sense, the material that is being, you know, how would I say it? The body is the soldier, matter is the soldier. The soldier that is not there to, in some sense, question. The soldier is just notices that like a command has been given. The body's purpose is just primarily movement, no ideology attached. That means if anybody just moves, you're completing some sort of nano purpose, you know, micro purpose, you know. The person's like, man, you know, it's like I stood up from a chair and I completed my micro purpose, you know, in existence, you know, a micro. I stood up from the chair of my beliefs, you know, that's like a great view. The body is being instructed by the DNA, which is like memory. The DNA also is acting like a vehicle. So it's as if like what is driving the body is DNA, and what is driving the DNA? We say the conditions of the world, and then what is in some sense driving the conditions of the world? Eventually, guys, pretty much knowledge is like we're like a young child asking, you know, why, until we reach the unknown. That's it. And when we reach the unknown, that's when Albert Einstein was like, imagination is more. Here, I'll find a quote. Einstein says imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited, imagination encircles the world. Albert Einstein says imagination is everything. It is the preview of life's coming attractions. So what Albert Einstein is saying here is that the reason imagination is more important than knowledge, because when we reach the edge of all that we can know, we have to be explorers again. And that's what the educational system doesn't teach. That's what ideological systems that don't want intelligent people, right? Because intelligence is updating. You know, it's bizarre to me, just like how there's a sort of natural selection in regards to biology, I think there's a sort of sociological and cultural natural selection, you know, or unnatural selection, let's call it, the unnatural selection of the mind, where it's as if there is a survival of the fittest game, a Hunger Games of ideas. It's as if it's not just what human beings survived on the earth. It's as if what ideas that move these human beings have also survived on the earth. And what is more important, to be able to think life is just, you know, it's just free will of the individual, or think of it, it's the divine will of the world. Which one? Right? And the person has to see that in some sense, if they believe in God, then God's creation should be perfect. So our imperfections from the perspective of God may be perfect, you know, from a theological sense. That means God is like, God conceptually, the idea cannot be imperfect. And if God is watching us, that means perfection is watching us. Perfection is watching the imperfect, right? So the imperfect, thinking that there's something imperfect, they realize no, it's as if it's like their imperfection is perfect, right? This is a sort of, you know, it's like in earlier talks I would say it's like everywhere on the wheel of karma is a simulation, except the center of the wheel of karma doesn't move. The center of where the idea of truth has to be before it is even a subject, it's like as if a precondition. It's as if everything we can imagine on some level of our intelligent vision is having some reality influence, right? That means, let's say, you know, you put virtual reality goggles on someone, and then someone who doesn't have virtual reality goggles, and let's say somebody experiences like skydiving, right? You know, real skydiving. Somebody, let's say, somebody jumps out of a airplane, you know, somebody. Let's say somebody skydives and somebody puts on these goggles, and in virtual reality they're skydiving on their bed, like they're just lying down on their stomach on their bed with their hands kind of pointed towards the ceiling, and they in a virtual reality, let's say, you know, technology on their face, like they're inside, like they're experiencing skydiving. My point is that the unreal imagery behind our eyes has an influence on our behavior as if it was real. This is the biggest point. This point is where the hard problem and simple problems of consciousness realize that in some sense we have to wonder about consciousness from 4 stations of perspective. This is my personal view, you know. Somebody could be like, truth is emptiness. If truth is emptiness, everything that goes into emptiness is like everything's going back to truth, you know. If we say all of existence and singular manifestation of the whole cosmos, everything that exists, right? So first we're saying, what if non-existence is truth? Then we're saying, what if everything that exists simultaneously is being true? A sort of Spinozian God perspective. Or like the yogic, you know, samadhi perspective. Then there is the view of it through the filter of chaos and order. That means the moment the human mind saw opposites, little did it know it had divided the world. You know, there's the strategy, they say divide and conquer. What that means is like you disconnect a system. So let's say two generals are fighting in a battlefield and they're each looking at, okay, like my army is a system, my kingdom is a system, let's say my forces are a system, and then they say the other general's army or the other kingdom's army is like another, what do you call it, system. So the idea is, how can we make one system make decisions slower and more inefficiently than another system? This has been the approach in pretty much like anybody who reads The Art of War by Sun Tzu. The first thing he says is that the art of war is deception. Right? It's as if when it comes to pretty much war means conscious directing towards non-existence. Really, that's what it is. But what I'm saying that the general or whoever, like whatever archetype you put for this, the person has to understand their own system, understand the boundaries of their system, defend their boundaries, and when it comes to the psychological entity, it means understand your limitations or reobserve your limitations, you know, review your own world again, you know. There's no greater teaching than that, really. Novelty is the evolution of just truth. And so something seems to have made a singular universal position become two universal positions, the inner universe and the outer universe. And you can play with the language as well, you know. That's something I do, is that when you see the greatest minds on this planet don't know a single thing, then the person realizes the best strategy towards the education of the species is to, in some sense, if we can become 8 billion explorers in the void, we will move towards a way more efficient civilization than if we become 8 billion followers of past ideological landscapes of like behavior. Do you know what I'm saying? It's as if the person's like, God gave me free will, but religion is telling me I have to do something outside of my free will, right? You know, sometimes I feel like the concept of, for example, God, I see a beauty to that. The concept of the prophets, you know, I see a beauty to that. You know, the concept of revelation, I see a beauty to that, right? The concept of the divine, you know, I see a beauty to that. But I also see, like, our karma becomes where our attention is piloted towards. Light hits an object, then enters through the lens of our eyes and hits the mystery question mark behind our, you know, hits the question mark of the brain. So it's as if light is technically reflecting off a brain into the projection of the whole world. It's pretty much light is becoming an image, right? This is so bizarre, because is light the image? Is light a carrier system for the image? Is the light a way of, in some sense, the absence of the image? You know, I think the concept of teachers, people misunderstand the idea of the teacher, you know. People think the teacher is teaching the student. No, no, no. The teacher is serving the world, is in some sense being a student of the world. It's so remarkable. How do we find greatness in the void? That's the great puzzle of humanity. How do we reveal like a treasure the greatest value and possibility of intelligence? That means, imagine, I mean, we're temporary beings right now, but imagine like there were immortal beings in the future. Immortal beings would get bored of endlessly searching for knowledge in the unknown. At some point, I think, whether you're a temporary being or an immortal being, at some point the intelligence is like, why am I here? You know, imagine a person, you know, not externally, but a person, let's say, they didn't know how to pray, but they were in a place where people were praying, and for a second the person just closed their eyes. How would I say it? The attention that is being the world remains as an unknown variable in perception's approach. The nature of being is attention prior to shape. When we wonder about how we understand the world, our understanding is shapes. It's as if, imagine, you know, a kid looked at his father and he's like, why do I have to go to school? And the father's like, you just have to understand a lot of shapes. There's a geometry to how the species is understanding itself. Then there's a geometry to how the world is being. Then there is a mystery of space. You know, because it's as if we are, let's say there's just matter and space in the world that we see. So if we, it's as if we say, okay, we were born as a biological material entity. So it's as if the human mind has no problem accepting that the soul, poetically, the soul is in matter. That means we so easily accept that we are matter, you know. But now it's as if wondering, okay, what if the soul, there's in part of this intelligence that the human is experiencing is also being like a space that cannot die, right? It's as if eternal beings are overreacting to death and therefore reincarnating, you know. It's pretty much like a game of beginnings and endings, and at some point, you know, the person's like, I know everything is being held by everything I cannot see. Imagine having a respect for how incredible this world we're in is. It's as if multidimensional problem solvers, in some sense, or it's as if we are the multidimensional solutions to the singular problems on this planet. You know what the true feeling and honor of an advanced civilization is going to be like? It's going to be this feeling that the greatest achievement is for a species is self-awareness. So technically it would be collective awareness. Collective awareness is that's pretty much the light in the skies, emanating from this guy's eyes in the picture. You know, guys, I can't tell if the deer in this picture is breaking the fourth wall or not. It's like even the idea of ourself is reflecting off of the sun, because the light beam is technically, you know, the sun, a part of the sun. It's not the sun, but it's from the sun, you know. That means it's as if, like, when I look at this solar system, aside from the sun, it's as if nothing else has respect for this planet. You know, the sun's like, all right, Earth, I'll give you some light, you know, hang in there, you know. We are, what human consciousness is the gift of the sun to the Earth. It's honestly, we are the child of light and matter in space. Or maybe this is going to be bizarre, but it could be that space is the child of light and substance. You know, in front of our eyes, it's easy to consider we're being objects, no problem. Or, you know, the person like does a backflip, you know. But in the inner realms, you know, who is knowing that they are an object? That knower cannot be an object. It's aware prior to the object. Like, I don't know if people notice it, but it's kind of hilarious when a person, like, if a person, like, let's say you go into the bed, like, you're trying to sleep, right? So you close your eyes and you're just there in your bed, and imagine you watch like a movie, as if like you're in a cinema. You watch how your mind is drifting into sleep. You know, people are going to notice before they reach a vanish point in their consciousness and they go into deep sleep, they watch thoughts move It's as if, like, what dreams could be said to be are like the intentions of that the conscious waking state had for itself, but because the body is asleep, those intentions are happening as mind. It's like karma is happening in the dream states, right? I think our dream states are honestly like a karma purification system, you know. You know, the person dreams a nightmare, and it's like, why did I dream such a messed up nightmare? You know, and then they're like, oh yeah, samsara, you know. Maybe, you know, imagine a Buddhist dreams a nightmare. It's like, oh, okay. At least, you know, experientially the karma is returned. It's as if every person has to find contentment with their own mind's source and their inner realms. Because if you don't find contentment, then you are technically forever alone as a subject, right? But in front of your eyes, right, there is the collectivity of an unknown event, right? What I'm trying to say is that imagination is a private room, every person's private art studio, and the world is like the true art event, you know, it's like the Renaissance. And I think really, unless human beings can be content with the most simplest states of being, how are they going to achieve the complex, right? People think training means just complex activity. No. Training is like, you can train yourself to be simple. You know, a person could just, like, the yogi would just go sit and be like, what is my mind? You know, the mystic would be like, okay, let me see what my mind is, and they would just watch. Then the next day they would watch again. And eventually it's like, what you come to is to realize that life is an activity independent of ideology. And when you realize that one's relationship with ideology can be summed up into like the statement like, was I acting as a name this whole time? It's as if the person's like, it laughs at how they believed letters could be them. Do you know that it's like the superiority of the dimensions of intelligence, you know? It's as if the simplest people are actually have the most efficient karma to receive the most complex things. You know, people should not think the outer realms is a simulation. They should think that their inner realms is a simulation of the unknown mover of attention. There was this guy who went to this guru, and he's like, you know, Guru, I've understood your teachings on the ego. I shouldn't say that. It's like, this guy goes to this guru. Okay, I'll reset the story. This guy goes to this guru and says, can you show me God? And the guru is like, sure. And the guy's like, you sure? Like, are you sure you can show me God? Right? And the person's like, yeah, I can show you God. Right? And then the person's like, okay, show me, you know? And so, this enlightened being, imagine this guru looks at this disciple and says, that momentary disciple, and tells him, sorry guys, I just had to write something down. The guru looks at the disciple and says, okay, so it's like, okay, you don't believe in God, what do you believe? And the person says, let's say the most transcendental thing I believe is that I have an ego, like I'm a subjective self, right? Now this person says, the guru says to this guy that, okay, what is moving your ego is God. And God is an inconceivable unknown truth. And truth is another way of saying it's one moment. Truth is a momentary being, you know. Like really, like when they say to people, be truthful, what does that mean? Like truthful on how deep of a level, right? If we want to be truthful, for example, you know, to the mind, it's as if then life can't be just orchestrated based on physical events. If you want to be truthful even beyond like what is aware of the mind, it's like the most honest person is going to realize everything is unknown. The unknown is like the I would say the finale of honest, you know. I don't know how to say it, but it's like shifting the attention of the species to this it's as if when that guy realized that the unknown is moving the known, and when you look at the role of the human being in this world that is starting from the unknown, and then you're born and you're walking into the known world, right? And then you, at the end, whatever happens, it's like you go to the unknown world, you know? Like they had the term underworld, but nobody said there's like an unknown world and there's a known world. There's no heaven or hell. There's just question marks and, you know, exclamation points. You know, I think if an artist wonders about this yogic view that life is a dream called samsara and we need to wake up from this dream, right? It would be like I would think like a great artist would think, or let's say an artist would think, as if, why do I need to draw till infinity? Why do I need to seek the new till infinity? Why do we care for infinite continuity as a species? That means I'm thinking like in a world of immortal beings, it's as if like it ends up becoming a Tower of Babylon scenario. Pretty much human beings are either don't exist or exist in a fragmented way or exist collectively. That's it. Like just three options. We either, you know, work efficiently and get to see the advanced civilization, or the species works inefficiently, which would be another way of saying we destroy our potential before we actualize it. That's truly a sort of inefficiency. So, a quick intermission. I've stepped back into cyberspace, in the same way, like, we look at our ancestors and how they invented the wheel, and it was like we look at them and they were so primitive but also ingenious. It's like cyberspace is going to be the same thing. The future generations are going to look at 2022 and feel like we're the earliest, kind of like we're literally as primitive as the caveman to the future generations. And when it comes to cyberspace, like, technically I'm a cyberspace caveman to like 1,000 years the future generations. There, all of us are, all YouTubers are being like the first cyberspace beings, We're manifesting human archetypes into cyberspace. That's the power of social media. Because right now, civilization is in a dishonest phase. It's in an inefficient dishonesty. People can't trust the world they're in, so they fight it. They run away from it or they fight it, pretty much. Right? And so, distrust is a state of infinite skepticism. And infinite skepticism means you're never accepting, which is bizarre, right? It's as if you're a temporary human being. You're here for let's say 100-year lifespan, and it's like you have a choice of like a bird that's flying over a forest, deciding on which branch to land on, and then, okay, look at the world through that, let's say, branch of knowledge. When I went to Rishikesh, India in 2016, there was this, treated by other people as an enlightened figure, as someone who had understood divinity. And so I went up to him and I'm like, hey man, I've had this like burst of inspiration with writing and like drawing and just all this, creative outburst, So, and then I asked him, what does this mean? And he looked at me and he said one word, and he said sanskara. And I was like, okay, what is that, right? And he told me that it's impressions, that these he was telling me pretty much like what you're doing and all your writing and, let's say, Mr.Within talks and all of this, is that in some sense it's my sanskara. It's what I have, the impressions as a transcendental being I have accumulated. It's as if imagine every soul poetically being the journey of attention throughout the eons through various manifestation frameworks. Or formats. Format would be a better word. It's like, where's the format? Oh yeah, it's like it's incarnated as a human being. We're right now in the human format, guys, or maybe the human font. If we saw other species, other civilizations as like fonts, we're right now the human font, we can choose, just like a person can choose, their handwriting, we can choose a better world. Oh man. I think if somebody says Mr. Within, when would you feel like, these Mr. Within talks have gotten very close to their purpose? I would say when the future generations maybe hear these talks I'm giving, and they're going to feel as if I was able to watch them from here. That's pretty much I would say the divinity of the futurist. You see, it's like some people, they are working with the past, so it's as if for them in their inner realms poetically, it's like they have angels or whatever story they want. right? But for a futurist, I would say, you know, let's say a meta-futurist, you know, or let's say, instead of meta-futurist, let's say a visionary futurist. It's not angels that guide you, it is your future selves. You see, something I have realized that I have always had a devotion for. I think that we are all like this, that we have a devotion for not just that we existed, but in some sense, in what style did manifestation happen? Because how the world happens to an individual is on some deep psychological telling them what they are. It's like not just it's like not just inner events are affecting us, outer events affect us. And it's as if we are, the body is surviving in one existential dimension, and the mind is surviving in two experiential dimensions. One, the experience of simulating the world, and one simulating the self. That means the brain is actually being the whole world, and then being a selection from that whole world. The brain is cherry picking from how it's actually being a world. Right? The idea of a self is only in speech, mobility, and communication. Because let me tell you, nobody cares for the past as much as the future does. This is not stated often. There's this poet called Kabir. He says, many know that the drop merges into the ocean, but few know that the ocean merges into the drop. And it's another way of saying, many know that the past engages the future, but few know that the future engages the past. You see, it's like we think in the future it's just human storyline, it's a collective awareness. That means the universe reveals to the psychology of man as if a sort of knighthood. That means, imagine karma, which was thought to be like an enemy. Karma ends up becoming, in some sense, knighting you, right? And then it's as if the lords of karma knight you, and for a moment you're like, how would I say it? For a moment you just feel as if like, where is the honor of the moment? Where is the spirit that moves the moment rooted? What is its intent? It's as if like, imagine if all of civilization, like back in the day, some people believe it was like all built on a giant, like this is, the realms of fiction, mythology, but I'll say like they believed that it's like the civilization was on a giant turtle's back, okay? So now imagine somebody, putting their hand on the neck of this giant turtle and be like, okay, this thing's alive, right? So it's another way of you realizing the world is acting like it's alive, in order for us to have free will in choosing how our life moves. The brain is like, let's say, a conscious zone of being, okay? And now the brain is looking at the whole world, copy-pasting it, right? And in some sense, from the copy-pasted version of the whole world, sculpting a self. That self then becomes how the free will leaps to the next moment. The attention is very mysterious, right? Because it's kind of like how we have our, like, let's say, central vision, and we have our peripheral vision, okay? And it's another way of saying, like, at the edges of your world view, what is the nature of the viewer? What is the nature of this I am? Every person who's said, this is my body, my mind, my soul, who is that my? You know, that's when mysticism settles in. And so I would say in modern culture, you know, philosophers begin, in some sense, you know, starting their great work. You know, it becomes a performance of multidimensional minds rather than, you know, the extinction of a singular body. You know, the species should have a capacity that if in some sense anything heads our way, right, we can consciously engage it. Imagine imagine this hypothetical story, okay, where somebody's future self comes back. Sorry guys, I actually have to write something. Sorry about that, guys. An idea entered my mind. I just had to write it down. One of those write it or lose the idea moments. Imagine the future self of somebody comes back, and the future self of that person, let's say, is a cool guy, right? So the future self looks at the past self and says, hey man, I can tell you right now, like, what you can do to live like an incredible life. Do you want to know it? Right? It's as if, do you want me to tell you, you know, how to, in some sense, change your future? And so imagine the past self suddenly looks at its future self and says, no, I don't want you to tell me how I can change the future, you know. And the future self says, can I know why? And the self of that moment says, because it's like pressing a button of randomity. That means it's as if strangely, you know, we human beings in a micro view on like reality, they may suffer from what's happening, like, you know, the details of what's happening. But in some sense, in the overall view, what is happening is so grand. You know, it's as if, like, imagine that moment, right? Like, a child opens its eyes, right? And the whole family celebrates, right? Now imagine the human species being like a child opening its eyes in a sort of galactic, universal, interstellar framework. That means it's as if there won't just be mythologies on Earth. It's like space stations will have their own mythology. There's going to be 100% like space station temples, you know. Or even you could go take it really dehumanized and say there's alien temples or whatever, you know. Imagine aliens invade Earth and human beings are like, oh no, aliens have invaded Earth, and suddenly somebody says, it's not just that, man, what's worse is that they're religious aliens. They have their own, it's like the aliens, imagine, had their own fundamentalist perspective of absolute world after being, you know. You know, if aliens land on Earth and I'm walking on a park and they're like, you know, we're here to contact your species, I'll be like, buddy, you're early. You've come too soon. You know, if aliens come back, Mr. Within would be like, okay, guys, you know, just hold on, you know, just hold on a little bit. Because let me tell you, man has to discover his true nature as a collective force before any sort of huge shift happens, you know. Sometimes I think, like, even though, Like there's war and cruelty and messed up things happening on the planet, but on a global level in 2022, do you know, it's as if like there's a sort of standard, it's as if a sort of global identity of all nations are arising, as if nations were all like kids in a classroom. It's like they're suddenly realizing the value of the classroom and what the teacher is. Who the teacher is the future. You know, that means it's like what true, I think this is I would say my poetic view on politics, that what true government should be the guardian of the future of the species. That's it. If that principle is taught, you know, that it's as if like we can keep the world alive for those who will be born one day. You know, that's the important thing. You know, guys, I think this is a perfect time for me to go into a quote tunnel. And the quote tunnel is this part of the episode where I just read a bunch of quotes. But the theme, sometimes it's for quotes of a person, but today I'm going to go into a quote tunnel which is theme-based. So pretty much I'm going to read a bunch of quotes of how human beings in the past saw language, okay? Or views on language, pretty much. Ludwig Wittgenstein says a serious and good philosophical work could be written consisting entirely of jokes. Ludwig Wittgenstein says all philosophy is a critique of language, though not in Mothner's sense. It was Russell who performed the service of showing that the apparent logical form of a proposition need not be its real one. Okay, so Ludwig Wittgenstein is giving props to Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell has a quote, I'll read it here. The doctrine of maintaining that the language of daily life, with words used in their ordinary meanings, suffices for philosophy, I find myself totally unable to accept, because it makes almost inevitable the perpetuation amongst philosophers of the muddle-headedness they have taken over from common sense. You see, this is only if common sense is not being acknowledged first. The idea is pretty much we see what we have, then we see what else we can have, you know. Because no human being can claim a universal dictatorship, right? You see, it's as if like the counter of language is a technology, ultimately. You know, I'm saying that instead of ignoring the physical dimensions, ignoring the non-physical dimensions, we become conscious of all dimensions. Like a bunch of survivors on an island, a species is trying to use all the angles of perception it can have to the world. The world is like it's like truth is like the center of a circle, and every human being is like a certain angle. of looking at that truth. And technically, when we all look at the center of truth, we're the same when we look at the circumference and endless sphere. It's as if infinity is the back door to truth. And language has an infinite potential. Right now, like language evolution has slowed down, right? It's as if it's kind of cruel how the human mind is being literally programmed, because language is the code. You see, I don't know how to say this, but it's like everybody, alongside being a physical entity, is being a character in a subjective story which they claim to be their own mind, right? And so the relationship of our inner view on life and our outer view on life, at some point, the bird chooses how it wants to move its wings, Ludwig Wittgenstein says the sole remaining task for philosophy is the analysis of language. Yeah, because beyond that, you have to become an explorer. An explorer is not just a philosopher. There's a mystery to how it's all happening. And our attention is an access point. What consciousness is how is a moment holding everything. That seems to be consciousness. Now, the inner realms, there is consciousness to them, but here's the bizarre thing. Imagine a person's looking, like my eyes are open right now, I'm looking, at this lake in front of my place, and I'm seeing the lake. But right now, if I was to visualize a lake from another part of the world, or imagine as I'm looking at this lake in front of me, I visualize the Ganges River that I saw in India. Okay, it's as if, and I ask myself, with what eyes am I viewing? With what eyes am I seeing that Ganges River simultaneously in my mind as I'm looking at this lake in front of me right now? Right, and here's the fascinating thing: there is an inner sight, there is an outer sight, there are inner eyes. There are outer eyes. Our biological eyes, but when we wonder what is looking at imagination, when our eyes are closed, it's that inner eye doesn't exist. It's literally something that should be there is not there. That's the bizarreness of the problem of consciousness. Ludwig Wittgenstein says philosophy is a battle against the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of language. Henry David Thoreau says the language of friendship is not words, but meanings. Charlemagne says to have another language is to possess a second soul. William Arthur Ward, a warm smile is the universal language of kindness. Noam Chomsky, human language appears to be a unique phenomenon, without significant analog in the animal world. Yeah, it's the first archetype for the unnatural. It's just so fascinating that nobody's intelligence can be measured because we don't know what we are as beings truly. That means if there was any person on the planet that had lost a meaning to their life, it's as if what about the meaning to the world, to the life of the world? Jackie Chan says coffee is a language in itself. Nelson Mandela says if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. Ludwig Wittgenstein says the limits of my language means the limits of my world. Man, I wish these quotes were more philosophy oriented. Let me see. Okay, here. Mark Twain says, kindness is the language which the deaf can hear and the blind can see. Nelson Mandela says if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. Okay, no, this is a repeat. H. Jackson Brown Jr. says, never make fun of someone who speaks broken English. It means they know another language. Wait until people realize language doesn't exist. Like, that's gonna blow people's minds, you know? When they realize language was our attempt as a species to paint the canvas of, you know, how unknown this world is. It's like language is a strategy of an evolutionary creature to not freak out, you know, in how unknown everything is, you know. But at the same time, language is the opportunity of 4.5 billion years of evolution, you know. For me, you know, there was a time where, sure, I mean, a person, it's all about effort. Expression is effort, how much effort the person wants to release into the moment. Right? If a person wants to release a lot of effort, they just make their attention single pointed and they zoom in on something, and it's like they pour out like the efforts of their life force. Right? For me, my imagination was through language. Right? That means I would read books and I would be able to, like, I couldn't see a movie then. Right? But then something happened that in some sense I realized all words are pointing to worlds. And the danger of belief in a changing universe is that you may deny yourself, you know, it's as if you may deny yourself your future by not believing in it, you know. What else can the species do? We either build physical stuff or we advance like the dimensions of like inquiry into the mind, you know. Like, there should be in educational systems, like, teachers who are like, all right, kids, for your homework, you're going to go and wonder about your own mind, you know? Maybe not that deep, but, like, I don't know. I'm trying to say that it's like the mind is something that if through a playful freedom, there is given the opportunity of the most complex engagement, like, it's as if, like, I would be surprised if, like, they gave primary kids like global problems and they wondered how they would solve them or what solutions they would find. I think the imagination of the younger generations can just be like, you know, it's like before we're shaped, you know, how the soul moves, you know, suggests what it is. There's even a transcendental concept of honor, like those people who will have, like, let's say, friends and family in cyberspace in the future. Like, I really should work on my science fiction and get this out there for you guys, because a lot of the stuff I'm trying to talk about, it's like, there's a hidden, it's like to every vertical moment of truth, there's a hidden horizontal story of another possibility. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry says language is the source of misunderstandings. Ludwig Wittgenstein says if we spoke a different language, we would perceive a somewhat different world. Dale Carnegie says your purpose is to make your audience see what you saw, hear what you heard, feel what you felt. Relevant detail, couched in concrete, colorful language is the best way to create the incident as it happened and to picture it for the audience. Cesar Chavez says our language is the reflection of ourselves. Victor Hugo, the man who does not know other languages unless he is a man of genius necessarily has deficiencies in his ideas. When he says a man of genius, because mathematics, I would say to some degree, is mathematics could be like the first extraterrestrial contact, The ability of a human being to count was like the most alien thing that had happened in history. Well, no way. This is one, this is one, this is two. Holy shit, evolution of mind. Oh man. C.S. Lewis says language exists to communicate whatever it can communicate. Some things it communicates so badly that we never attempt to communicate them by words if any other medium is available. Samuel Taylor Coleridge says works of imagination should be written in very plain language. The more purely imaginative they are, the more necessary it is to be plain. Casey Miller says our native language is like a second skin. So much a part of us we resist the idea that it is constantly changing, constantly being renewed. Samuel Daniel says, and who in time knows whither we may wend the treasure of our tongue? To what strange shores this gain of our best glories shall be sent? To unknowing nations with our stores, what worlds in the yet unformed Occident may come refined with the accents that are ours. George Steiner, language is the main instrument of man's refusal to accept the world as it is. That's a good statement. Bill Watterson says verbing weirds language. It's like the fact that there's even language, there's nothing stranger than that. Lauren Harris says, the thought of today cannot be expressed in the language of yesterday. William Shakespeare says, fee. Okay, I'm reading this wrong, sorry guys. Fie upon her. There's language in her eye, her cheek, her lip. Nay, her foot speaks, her wanton spirits look out at every joint and motive of her body. Joseph Conrad, to a teacher of languages, there comes a time when the world is but a place of many words, and man appears a mere talking animal, not much more wonderful than a parrot. Okay, that's too, like, it's way more complex than that. Catherine Dunn says, I have been a believer in the magic of language since at a very early age. I discovered that some words got me into trouble and others got me out. Wendell Berry says, the constructions of language, which is to say the constructions of thought, are formed within experience, not the other way around. Edward Sapir says language is the most massive and inclusive art we know, a mountainous and anonymous work of unconscious generations. That's a good quote. Gaston Bacillard says, a special kind of beauty exists, which is born in language, of language, and for language. That means the beauty of the inner realms. The origin of communication is how the mind is living in a world behind its eyes before it's living in a world in front of its eyes. And based on the intensity of the circumstance of the moment, people are like trying to balance themselves between the, you could say, being more mind focused or body focused. An advanced civilization should have an advanced strategy to both of these. We're not living at that time now. You know, we're living at a time of, I would say, the world is forgetting itself to build another world again. You know? Thomas Carlyle says, the coldest word was once a glowing new metaphor. And Angela Carter says, language is power, life, and the instrument of culture, the instrument of domination and liberation. I would say that language is how attention in the moment moves, right? Regardless of like how a person plays, let's say, ideological dress up in who they think they are, right? It's like on some level, it's just the presence of attention in a moment and the capability and ability this moment has upon the recognition of nature's rhythm before its own. It's as if it's like being born in a cosmos. It's like, you know, you're in like this place where everybody's dancing, and then for a second you're like, where am I? Why is everybody dancing? And then you stop dancing, and then you begin to notice how the world moves before you move. This is closer to how, you know, the shaman perceives. For the shaman, the world is like the greater self that speaks, you know. Guys, nature has an incredible divinity. You know, nature is pretty much the divine in the world, you know. Ralph Waldo Emerson says language is fossil poetry. Holy shit. We're seeing some archaeological ambitions from Ralph Waldo Emerson here. Benjamin Lee Worf, language shapes the way we think and determines what we can think about. Federico Fellini, a different language is a different vision of life. This is true. It's not a different, I would say it's not a different vision of life. It's a different identity in life. That means when a person speaks a bunch of languages, they are being a different self in each of those. It's as if three parallel universes. It's like a person who speaks two languages, their mind can exist in two parallel universes at once. Milton E. Erickson says we always translate the other person's language into our own language. This is kind of like we have no choice. The brain is happening as sight, so it's very hard to say that what we see is actually what we see or how our brain is happening. Ammianus Marcellinus says the language of truth is unadorned and always simple. Jean Dubuffet says art is a language, an instrument of knowledge, an instrument of communication. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, a man who is ignorant of foreign languages, is also ignorant of his own language. William Wordsworth, oft on the dappled turf, at ease I sit, and play with similes, loose type of things through all degrees. Samuel Johnson, you may translate books of science exactly. The beauties of poetry cannot be preserved in any language except that in which it was originally written. And what it was originally written is direct experience. That means the purest art is like, an inner universal shift, Imagine seeing something so incredible. Like for me, the idea of the advanced civilization was this. If somebody says, Mr. Within, have you seen an angel on earth? That'd be the closest thing is the advanced civilization. That's the archetype. With a core foundation of honoring the unknown, a species finds a benevolent tolerance, where it's as if 8 billion explorers are like, before we fight and destroy each other, let us see where we are, what we are, and then what we can be, and then after we have become that, we shall fight. Do you see what I mean? There's a time and place for conflict, and right now, I would say for the next, not just 100 years, for the next 1,000 years, it is so important that we press pause on savageness and violence, and we press pause to some degree on certain technological, like fast-paced technological movements, right? And the idea is that we are trying to adjust the user of technology before the let's say the poetically, the futuristically divine technologies appear, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe says, because everyone uses language to talk, everyone thinks he can talk about language. You see, guys, I'm pretty much saying the educational system is pretty much like a photo album of verbs and nouns, okay? And before there were verbs and nouns, there was an original awareness. This original awareness is the simplest and most divine term I have found for it, is like the original presence. It's your original presence. That means a presence that has to be nothing else because it's just being what it is, right? When a person reaches that original presence is not dualized, it's not humanized even to, in some sense, have fear, love, hate, or doubt. It's as if a sort of renunciation happens, as if there's a ladder to a plateau where the perceptions before are held differently. You see, there is a sort of, let's say, okay, for a manner of speech, just for the, as a spokesman of this, of the inner realms and outer realms, I'll say, like, because we are new to manifestation, the responsibility to see how far we go is left to us, And so, on some level, the species can't do anything. The body exists to lead to the free will. The body serves the free will. and the free will is the mind. Do you know? And when we come to, I guess, let's say a view on imagination, it's a conscious projection, which its context is being unconsciously projected. Imagination is another way of saying there's this strangely unknown, automated side to how we are choosing how thoughts become vocalized. Do you know there's an automation to it? There's like, what I mean by this is it's as if it's like a river. Do you know the mind is acting like a river or like a current? Do you know? And imagine somebody like takes a glass and a champagne glass and like puts that in the river, right? So it's as if the mind is at its core how something the nature of the universe is doing. To claim that we can even understand it is technically not a possibility. It's as if reality, when we realize we are imagining reality, that's when everybody who said I don't believe in imagination is going to be like, oh wait a minute, no, okay, maybe we should reconsider imagination's role, you know. I say, I said in another talk that if Aristotle was to look at, let's say from the Aristotelian view, outer physical reality it's like the world in front of our eyes is 4 out of 4 dimensions real, and the world behind our eyes in regards to imagination is 3 out of 4 dimensions real. That means imagination is just 1/4 unreal. It's like 1/4 of imagination is unreal, guys. The other is, you can say it has a sort of formal cause, a material cause, and the efficient cause, which is in some sense like, I guess, a sense of relationship of intelligence with its own purpose. A person can look at the geometry of the moment and think this is only what the moment is. You know, it's even kind of bizarre to me how we can even, how easily we have considered the human archetype to just be, sensory based. It's as if we know that there's like 5 senses. Now each sense is receiving its own sort of input, and its own sort of input in the inner realm translates that means what you hear is like an event, a unique event, and what you see is a unique event, and what you taste is a unique event, and what you touch is a unique event. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm saying like what you smell is a unique event. So all these senses, it's as if the body is like there's one biological body and it's receiving, it's inputting, right, sensory perception. And now we're saying if we like our eyes visually is like 1/5. If somebody says I gotta see it to believe it, it's as if like 1/5 of they're believing in 1/5 of their senses. Guys, this episode has gone long enough. I think it's like I thought that there'd be better quotes on language, but I don't know. I'll read a few more and a few final words and I'll end it off. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, thought is the blossom, language the bud, action the fruit behind it. George Herbert says the eyes have one language everywhere. Simone Weil says a mind enclosed as language is in prison. Yeah, because it's the language would be technically memory worship. Right? Like if somebody like is reminiscing about how the past was, that's memory worship, guys. Like the person can worship a memory, you know. Usually when human beings get old, that tends to happen. But the idea should be that the species, in every moment of its life, whatever is happening, there should be a fearless attitude, because there's an importance for the whole species to instantly know its nature and then efficiently continue on. It's as if we're like in some sort of simulation game, and we're like, okay, there's levels, great. So the fastest way to climb the levels is as if wondering about what is the greatest archetype in each level, right? It's as if philosophy is another way of saying we are taking back the freedom of our world, and from neutrality wondering what other possibilities are there, right? I will tell you, it's like one of the greatest victories of mankind is when the educational system is just looking at all children, you know, and is saying we're all here to see how far we can go before the lights turn off, right? And everybody's acknowledging this, right? It's like the purpose of the vision of mankind is the journey of an unknown viewer and how far it can go. Martha Graham says dance is the hidden language of the soul, of the body. Confucius says, if language is not correct, then what is said is not what is meant. If what is said is not what is meant, then what must be done remains undone. If this remains undone, morals and art will deteriorate. If justice goes astray, the people will stand about in helpless confusion. Hence, there must be no arbitrariness in what is said. This matters above everything. Yeah, but it's as if, you see, it's fear-oriented, what Confucius is saying. That means if a person like really gives into the idea of extinction, they're going to fear their future. And fear means non-engagement with what you're fearing. Fear is like evolution pausing attention. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. says language is the blood of the soul into which thoughts run and out of which they grow. I think that's unexpected. C.S. Lewis says always try to use the language so as to make quite clear what you mean, and make sure your sentence couldn't mean anything else. I have no idea how to interpret this next quote, but I'll share it in case people in the comment section want to comment on it. T.S. Eliot says the communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living. You know, guys, this quote, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this quote. Okay, let me see what it is. The communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living. The communication of the dead means their dreams is tongued with fire. That means it's like non-existence could be the fire. So the dreams of the dead, of those who've died, is like stopped existing beyond the language of the living. I think fire, there's different ways people can see the archetype of fire. Like there's a religious view, and then there's this view of like the fire in regards to the idea of the phoenix. And that view on fire is as if fire is a resurrection. Fire is in some sense a purification, you know. Like they would seal wounds in medieval times by like, you know, putting their sword in the fire and then like putting it on the wound or something. Ludwig Wittgenstein says, like everything metaphysical, the harmony between thought and reality is to be found in the grammar of language. Hippocrates says the chief virtue that language can have is clearness, and nothing detracts from it so much as the use of unfamiliar words. Stuart Hall says, people have to have a language to speak about where they are and what other possible futures are available to them. Ivan Turgenev says, in days of doubt, in days of dreary musings on my country's fate, you alone are my comfort and support, O great, powerful, righteous, and free Russian language. Galileo says philosophy is written in this grand book, the universe, which stands continually open to our gaze. But the book cannot be understood unless one first learns to comprehend the language and read the letters in which it is composed. Zoe Wanamaker says, Shakespeare's taught me that there are more words in the English language than I have got in my head. You know, I mean, wait until she finds a dictionary, you know, like that. You know, I think like those who made the dictionary, right, they all got into a meeting and they're like, guys, what are we going to show people? That's the evolution. That's how the history of dictionaries, guys. You know, it's a grand achievement, honestly. Companies involved in like creating dictionaries. That is like. You know, I feel life is like, you know, matter has its own destiny. One becomes content with that. Objects have their own destiny, subjects have their own destiny, and then the inner witness is left with itself, like the unknown, the unchangeable witness, not just the inner witness. It's as if when the unknown is left to be unknown, all it can do is be. So you can say being is when an unknown unknown self is accepting an unknown world, and doing is when a known self is accepting a known world. Like the word human being, the word human is in one side of the coin, and the word being is on the other side of the coin. Anyways, guys, this was a very long episode. Thanks for hanging in there and hearing this out. Karl Kraus says language is the mother of thought, not its handmaid. Jacques Derrida says as soon as there's language, generality has entered the scene. Richard Dawkins, we are a unique ape. We have language. Other animals have systems of communication that fall far short of that. They don't have the same ability to communicate complicated conditionals and what ifs and talk about things that are not present. Yeah, you know, it's as if like what we see in the mirror appears to be an animal, but how this animal is behaving doesn't seem to be animal-like. We are the strangest animal on earth. Eric Fromm says both dreams and myths are important communications from ourselves to ourselves. If we do not understand the language in which they are written, we miss a great deal of what we know and tell ourselves in those hours when we're not busy manipulating the outside world. Moss Def says, what I take from writers I like is their economy. The ability to use language to very effective ends. The ability to have somebody read something and see it. Or for somebody to paint an entire landscape of visual imagery with just sheets of words. That's magic. Yeah, it's interdimensional, I would say. The mind is like we have access to another dimension, which we can't completely figure out what it is, but we have access to it. Like one of the most complex tasks is for how the global ethnocentrism in the future is surpassed. Right? Because the idea is that true advancement should, for now, we keep the same context. I don't know how to tell you. It's like the future will be looking at life way beyond language, guys. We're just like, again, the cavemans of the future, but like the time travelers of the past. It's like any person who can remember anything, the person's like, yo, have I been a time traveler this whole time? You know? And I would say not just a time traveler, but an image traveler, an inner event traveler, right? Behind your eyes, there's a freedom that is not in front of your eyes, and what happens behind your eyes, because it is in the scope of consciousness, your psyche can react to it, can consciously respond to it, the wiser you are. And at the same time, I'm giving this talk in the middle of nowhere, guys, like, give me a break. It's like, podcasting live from the middle of nowhere, from a cosmos that we can't see the end of, and on a rock spinning in the middle of, we don't know even where up and down is, It's like nobody is standing straight on Earth because it's, or rotating, they tell people stand up straight. I think it's impossible on a spinning one, straight in accordance to what edge of void, Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. Much blessings, and honestly, there's so much more to language, and I couldn't find a good quote tunnel, but anyways, I guess one last thing I'll say about the title. Consciousness is self-reflecting off of the sun. An imagery you can see from this is like light entered our eyes, a self appeared. Now this self is wondering about its source, and when it realizes it's light that's leading to the vision of ourself, in some sense, the consciousness reflects off of the sun to wonder, what am I beyond light? So the philosophical, it's as if like you could say the curiosity, the wonder of the philosopher for what else is there is equivalent to, like, metaphorically and poetically, like the self being like a light beam, returning back to how the sun was its visual source, and in some sense reflecting off of the sun into the curiosity of, okay, what greater dimensions await all dimensions, because that's really the true value of the collective unconscious. A person honors their conscious life, sure, but how many people honor their unconscious life? How many people wonder about the relationship of consciousness and unconscious? And 2022 is the best year to write a book, guys. And a book can be written as based on your expectation. A person can choose to, if there's a large enough vision, it's like it will take many pages to, like, put it into words, but perhaps the destiny of a man who speaks too much is to return to the silence. That means the destiny of the advanced civilization, theoretically, if it's infinitely advancing, would be a sort of invisible, would be a sort of infinite, invisible, and silent civilization. That means in the silence, it's like we can't see it from where we are, but it's like, I don't want to say poetically like the ghost of civilizations past, but like it's as if the presence of a sort of advancement before us is just in the room, on the planet, right? It's as if there's a planetary memory, and we're individuals with our own memory, and when we are living in accordance to our own memory, in certain moments we wonder about the synchronization of our inner life with our outer life, right? Now the outer life is kind of like an unknown world moving on its own. The inner life is like, okay, there's a pilot as a subject, let's say stabilizing its attention in the present, Whatever happens in life, to wonder about how consciousness is being attention and energy at the same time, instantaneously happening. It's as if I think before we can have really great inventions, like advancements in science, it's like we need philosophers to, in some sense, wonder about how does consciousness connect to matter for the human being, and the conclusion would be that it's simultaneous. So the paradoxical nature of holy books, the paradoxical nature of things, is as if a species is realizing its mind has been separating the world for it to exist. So when that urge of separation is not there, the mind automatically goes to its true presence, and that's when the purest signal happens, and there is no image a person needs to have. It's as if it's like it's like you meet the unknown as the unknown. Like, that's a possibility, right? It's as if the unknown self of the known self was actually what was experiencing the unknown world, which the known self was in the passenger seat of, right? Pretty much there's question marks that in some sense human beings need to conquer. Like, world peace can instantly happen if we just become way more fascinated with understanding where we are and what advantages the species has, efficient advantages it has, rather than in some sense, chaos and order. It's like an endless cycle. It's like, how do we build something great in an endless cycle? It's like the idea has to be beyond cyclical. It's as if the person's, like Buddha said, it's like desire is the source of suffering, and there's suffering in the world, and then imagine the person's like, wait a minute, who does suffering exist to? Who's suffering? The greatness of the species is divine. Thanks for listening. Much blessings and host.